Good evening, church, and welcome to our Bible study in the book of Numbers. Unfortunately, we are back online tonight. Roads may be fine. I don't know. Some of you still had some icy spots or some slick spots, so we respect that. We want to keep everybody safe, and we're grateful for technology that allows us to do that. I have joked recently that due to the cold here in Lexington, that I will be under a bridge in Florida until springtime because I am freezing. But it's probably colder and worse in Florida tonight, so I'm going to stay here in Lexington. But I hope you're staying warm, staying dry, and we'll be back together, Lord willing, on Sunday. Well, tonight we continue our study in the book of Exodus. I'm sorry, not the book of Exodus, the book of Numbers. And we've called this series Desert Blessings. And it may seem odd to even do a study in the book of Numbers. All we do is count, right? That's what the book of Numbers is about. Not exactly. One of the great things about the book of Numbers, and we've seen over the last 3.5 years, not in Numbers, but starting in Genesis and walking through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and now into Numbers, is we have followed this story through, and we understand in greater detail what is going on in this journey and the challenge the Israelites have seen throughout all of this. But the other reason is that Numbers is a book about the in-between. We see in Exodus, they're in captivity, they are given salvation, they are rescued. Rescued to what? Well, they journey through the wilderness, this in-between, and their goal is the promised land. That represents their goal, their desire, their full salvation. So we see with the Exodus out of Egypt, we see salvation accomplished, but not yet realized, and we'll see that when they get into the promised land. Again, the in-between is the wilderness. And in the wilderness, there are challenges, there are difficulties, there is sin, there is judgment, so many different things. And we may look at that with Israel and we may say that has no application in my life whatsoever. But think about our life, right? Salvation was accomplished on the cross. And yes, we are saved in progress, currently saved, thanks to the Spirit and His sealing on us. We have been purchased, we have been redeemed, and the Spirit seals us or guarantees us until the day of our full redemption when Christ returns for us. And we look forward to that day, but we're in the same in-between. And yeah, it looks different in many ways, but do we not struggle, right? Do we not struggle with the challenges of this in-between? We are grateful for salvation accomplished at the cross, but yet we yearn for salvation realized. So the story of Numbers, yes, it's about the Israelites. It's about their wilderness journey. But I tell you, it reminds us a lot about ours as well. Their struggles, hey, we often turn from Him. We're rebellious as well. And we see a lot of ourselves in the Israelites if we're honest. Well, looking back a few chapters, we're in chapter 26 and 27 tonight, preparing for what's next. But if you go back a few chapters to Numbers 22, Numbers 23, even into 24, we see this account of how Balak wanted to put a curse on the Israelites. So he calls Balaam, and of course Balaam is famous not for a potential curse, but for his donkey that talked. And one of the bizarrest stories, because he just talks back like it's, normal. Maybe he always talked to his donkey. Maybe that wasn't an odd thing for him. But he comes to Balak, and God keeps telling Balaam, no, don't do it. God protects supernaturally the people of Israel. What are they doing? While God is defending them, while God is protecting them, they are out committing horrible sin, spiritual and physical sin with the people of Moab and even some of the Midianites, as we see in chapter 25. So it's a tragic story. And honestly, we want to say, what's wrong with you people? Why don't you get it? Why do you go through this struggle over and over and over again? In fact, it seems like, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers have just been the same story every week at times. Same plot, at least. God's people are going to rebel, there's going to be judgment, and then they move forward. But is that not our story as well? Right? We're not studying with idols like the Israelites were, but we are studying with or struggling with other things such as materialism, people that we place in our lives above God, activities, whatever it may be, whatever that might be in your case, we struggle with these things. That is our idolatry, And it may look different than the Israelites' idolatry, but it's not all that different. So again, we're reminded of that. We look a lot like the Israelites. Tonight we're in Numbers 26, and we're taking a look at what's ahead, right? Preparing for what's next. Transition is never easy, and all of us have been through these things in our life. They have challenges, but God has something for us in it, and that's what we see tonight. So let's walk through this. We're going to see, first of all, the census. This is actually the second census that we see here for Israel. The first one was in Numbers chapter 1. Again, the book of Numbers, not actually about numbers. It's really just a book about how God is working in the wilderness in their lives. We won't read the whole chapter, but let's see a few things here. Numbers 26, verses 1 and 2. After the plague, the Lord said to Moses and Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, take a census of the entire Israelite community by their ancestral families of those 20 years old or more who can serve in Israel's army. Well, there are two purposes for this census. The first one is, of course, military, preparing for the battle ahead, counting the numbers, preparing the divisions for that battle that is to come. The second we see later on in verse 53, the land is to be divided among them as an inheritance based on the number of names. So this also had a very important purpose looking ahead to the division of the land. Something very tragic is revealed in this. Let me pull up this chart here for you. If we were to compare Numbers 26 with Numbers 1, we see some changes in population. Maybe you would expect this, maybe you wouldn't, but it just kind of hits us here in the face as we look at this chart. The tribe of Reuben has dropped from 46,500 to 43,700. But look at Simeon. 59,000 down to 22,000. We look through this chart, there's been others that have declined. In fact, 5 of the tribes have had a decline in population. This isn't a birth rate issue, this is a judgment issue. 7 of the tribes see increases in population, some more than others. Take a look at verse 7. Sorry, hang on here. Let me get back to the right screen. Verse 7, these were the Reubenite clans, and their registered men numbered 43,730. The son of Palu was Eliab. Actually, skip down to verse 10, or the end of verse 9. Verse 9, the sons of Eliab were Nemuel, Dathan, Abiram. It was Dathan and Abiram, probably a better pronunciation there, chosen by the community who fought against Moses and Aaron. They and Korah's followers fought against the Lord. You remember that from Numbers, I believe it was 16. But what happened? The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them with Korah when his followers died, and the fire consumed 250 men. They served as a warning sign. Now, the last word of verse 10 is translated as a sign in the CSB. Could be banner, could be something to that effect, but normally it was a positive example. For example, take a look at Exodus 17, verses 15 and 16. It says, and Moses built an altar and named it, the Lord is my banner, or the Lord is my sign, whatever you wanted to translate that as. Verse 16, he said, indeed, my hand is lifted up toward the Lord's throne. The Lord will be at war with Amalek from generation to generation. So it's a banner, a reminder, usually positive. But here we see it as a reminder, but not in a positive sense, right? Over and over again, we have seen positive reminders of God's faithfulness to Israel. He says, I am the Lord your God. I have brought you out of Egypt. I have protected you. I have done this for you. I have done that for you. Right? Remember these things as signs, as banners, so that in generations to come you can look back at these things and remember God's faithfulness. Remember who I am. Remember what I've done for you. But here he says, remember my judgment. I have 2 fingers that have scars on them. Actually, I have scars on more fingers than that, but 2 in particular, because I got both of those scars on the same day. I was running a wood router, and I made some dumb choices that day, and I am thankful that I still have fingertips on both of those fingers. But I tell you what, not only do I have scars, I also lack some feeling on those fingers. And ironically enough, every time I turn my router on, my fingers tingle just a little bit to remind me to be smart with that tool, right? It's a reminder of that day, of those injuries that I received. I have a healthy fear of my router now. Hey, don't forget the lessons that God teaches, right? Both the lessons God has taught you, the lessons God has taught others. Remember them. They have value for us. Don't walk away and forget those things. Some of them are painful. I'm not talking about your fingertips. I'm talking about things that have happened in your life. Things that remind you of maybe judgment, where God had to get your attention. I have some of those. Maybe things that were challenges in your life, but God taught you through those things, or just ways that God showed himself mighty. Don't forget God's faithfulness. Don't ever forget God's faithfulness. How many times have we seen that in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, even back into Genesis, over and over again? Don't forget who I am. Don't forget what I've done for you. And don't forget the relationship I have called you into. And you know what? That's a great reminder for us as well. But there's also something else here. If you read it quickly, you miss it. In fact, we read verses 7 through 10, told us about the rebellion of Korah. Look at verses 10 and into 11. Verse 10 says, "The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them with Korah when his followers died, and the fire consumed 250 men. They serve as a warning sign." But look at verse 11. "The sons of Korah, however, did not die." Again, that goes back to Numbers 16. We talked about the rebellion, the people that died. But Korah's sons didn't die. And that's surprising. That's interesting. In fact, odd might be the word that I would describe it as, because the sons of Dathan and Abiram did die. They ceased to exist that day. We're not told why some did and some didn't. I don't have a reason for that. I don't have an explanation for that. But what else do we know about the descendants of Korah? Can you think of anything else from the scripture that stand out to you? What about Psalm 42? For the choir director, a maskil of the sons of who? Korah. Interesting. Psalm 44, same thing. A maskil of the sons of Korah. Psalm 45, same thing. A maskil of the sons of Korah. In fact, 46, 47, 48, 49, 84, 85, 88, all psalms written by the descendants of Korah, right? This man who led a rebellion against Moses and Abraham, but against God, his descendants, given grace, given mercy, not destroyed with the rest of them, we find writing psalms. In fact, one commentator said these include some of the greatest expressions of faith and praise in the Bible, which have inspired some of our most beloved hymns and songs, such as Martin Luther's "A Mighty Fortress," Psalm 46. As Korah's descendants sang, ultimately the Lord prevails and brings good out of evil, even in Korah. And he says that's amazing grace. And yes, it is. God can bring beauty out of the ashes. He can, he does. You've seen that in your life. You've seen that in the lives of others. Again, why Korah's descendants? I don't know. But God extended them mercy And he does the same for us over and over and over again. Well, next in the passage, we see these daughters. Interesting segment. Daughters fighting for their rights to land. Look at chapter 27, verses 1 to 4. The daughters of Zelophehad approached. Zelophehad was the son of Hepher, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, from the clans of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. Skip down to verse 2. They stood before Moses, the priest Eleazar, the leaders, and the entire community at the entrance to the tent of the meeting. This is where they would go for judgments and discussions and to bring their complaints. And said, "Our fathers died in the wilderness." But he was not among Korah's followers who gathered together against the Lord. In other words, he wasn't one of the ones who was destroyed that day. Instead, he died because of his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan? Since he had no son, give us property among our father's brothers. Now, this isn't a random situation. Remember that one of the purposes of the census was the allocation of land in the promised land, looking ahead. Now, these daughters understood that they would be in a bad place without land. So this is really their fight to their right to exist, right? They were going to be very destitute. They were going to have a lot of trouble if they did not inherit land. Their family did not inherit land because of the actions, or not because of the actions, but because of the death of their father. They had no brothers for that land to be passed on to, so they're pleading for their right to exist. We probably also need to understand that this wasn't the only situation like this, right? A lot of people have died. We established that in the census. There's probably quite a few other scenarios where, there were no sons, and the daughter said, "Hey, wait a second, what's going to happen to us? Are we going to have land? Is our family going to have land? Or are our names going to basically be forgotten from the tribes of, and the families, the ancestral families of Israel?" So the question here was, how is Israel going to handle these things moving forward into the land? So think of this chapter as establishing case law, right? How is Israel going to handle this kind of thing? So verse 5, Moses takes it before the Lord. Verse 7, the Lord concurs with with the daughters and says, give them their hereditary land. Don't withhold that from them. So this establishes a statutory ordinance, something that is to be followed in the land of Israel. But don't miss something else. There's another thing that we have to look a little bit further into. What have we seen the entire time when things go poorly among the Israelites? Moses, take us back to Egypt. All we want to do is go back. Things were better there. They weren't, but they felt like that was the case. They lost their future vision of salvation, realized that was coming. All they could look back at was the old ways, the old land, Egypt, where in their minds everything was great. We don't see that here, do we? Things have changed, right? There's been some victories. You're dealing with a new generation of people now. In fact, there's only a few still left at this point that were from the old generation. They don't want to go back. They're looking ahead for the first time in faith. This is a big deal. They're looking forward to the land. They can see it. They know it's coming. Their inheritance, their salvation. And they're preparing for what's next, and they're trusting God. That's a great sign, because there's a lot more that's about to change. In fact, the final thing that we see in this section is a leadership transition. Numbers 27, verses 12 to 23. Take a look at verse 12. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go up this mountain of the Abarim range and see the land that I have given the Israelites. After you have seen it, you will also be gathered to your people as Aaron, your brother, was. When the community quarreled in the wilderness of Zin," Sorry, I'm several verses behind. There we go. Verse 14, when your community quarreled in the wilderness of Zin, both of you rebelled against my command to demonstrate my holiness in their sight at the waters. Those were the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. So Moses appealed to the Lord. Verse 16, may the Lord, the God who gives breath to all, appoint a man over the community who will go out before them and come back in before them, and who will bring them out and bring them in, so that the Lord's community won't be like sheep without a shepherd. The Lord replied to Moses, take Joshua, son of Nun, a man who has the Spirit in him, and lay your hands on him. Have him stand before the priest Eleazar and the whole community and commission him in their sight. Confer some of your authority on him so that the entire Israelite community will obey him. He will stand before the priest Eleazar, who will consult the Lord for him with the decision of the Urim. He and all the Israelites with him, even the entire community, will go out and come back in at his command. Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua, had him stand before the priest Eleazar and the entire community, laid his hand on him, and commissioned him as the Lord had spoken through Moses. So Moses' turn to die is coming. We've seen that happen with Aaron. We've seen it happen with Miriam. We still have some more time with Moses. We're not done with him, but we see how this is going to transpire. In fact, that leadership transition, that heir apparent is already named here. He's given authority, not only through the words of Moses, the actions of Moses, but more importantly, through the Urim, which was God's way of showing them at this time that God was transferring leadership to Joshua. Now, at this point, we have three people, and maybe some of their family, but we have three main people that are alive that came out of Egypt. You have Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. And in verse 14, Moses is reminded why he can't enter into the promised land. But you know, it's interesting. Every time when the Israelites messed up, who was the first person to fall on their face before God and to plead on their behalf? It was Moses, right? Over and over and over again. But here he doesn't plead on his own behalf, for his own case. Instead, he pleads for a leader that will have Israel's best interest in mind. God gives him the instructions how to publicly appoint Joshua. There's not a better candidate in all the land. And we've seen that already through the works of Joshua and his faithfulness to God. Go back to verse 18, though. I want you to see something important here. The Lord replied to Moses, take Joshua, son of Nun, a man who has the what? The Spirit in him, and lay your hands on him. Now, what's interesting about this is that ordinarily in the Old Testament, we don't see the Spirit on people. God dwelt in the tabernacle in the midst of the people, but very rarely is it said that he dwelt in or had his Spirit on or empowered someone. But we see that here. So Joshua is not an ordinary Israelite. Joshua is a man that God has blessed. Joshua is a man that God has placed his Spirit on and empowered him in a very special way to do a very important job. God has already set him apart here. The Spirit was already on Joshua, it said. So soon the baton, the leadership, the authority is going to pass from one shepherd to the next. And I find it so interesting that Moses uses that phrase. Of course, Moses used it before Jesus, but we see that later on in Matthew chapter 9, verse 36. Jesus says, when he saw the crowds, or it said of Jesus, he felt compassion on them because they were distressed and dejected like sheep without a shepherd. The point that Jesus would later make here is that people need a shepherd, right? For Israel in the days of Exodus, Moses was that shepherd. But his selfless life, his leadership point us forward to the perfect shepherd, the good shepherd, right? Jesus. And Moses was a good shepherd. He wasn't the good shepherd. Moses was a good shepherd. I like Moses. Is it okay for me to say that? I really like Moses. As you study the life of someone, you see their flaws. You see where they've messed up. I mean, verse 14 reminded us of that. But you see how they grow. You see where they started from and where they end up. I mean, we're talking about a man who killed someone, right? Fled to the desert. God speaks to him in a burning bush, and he says, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. I don't have enough confidence in you to do that. So God empowers him, of course, through Aaron. We remember that. Moses messed up. Moses got angry. Moses was a sinner like me and like you. But where do we see Moses at here? He's not pleading for God's mercy on himself. He's pleading for God's mercy for his people. He's pleading that God will do what is best for the people that he has led now for so many years. It's a different man. It's a man that I admire. It's a man that I respect. And it's a man that we can learn a lot from, not only in the sense of leadership, but in a man who just followed God. Not perfect, but when he messed up, he went back to God. And it's why Moses is regarded as one of the greatest figures in Israel's history today. Church, God is always working in us. He's preparing us. He's got something ahead for us. There's something next. Now, don't concern yourself about what that is all the time. Concern yourself on the preparation, where God has placed you at now, right? Don't focus on tomorrow. Don't worry about tomorrow, I should say. Worry about what God wants you to be now. Be like Moses, right? Someone who is growing, someone who's looking out for the good of others, right? Prepare yourself for what God has called you to do. Open your hearts, be obedient in church. Let's give ourselves away for his glory. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any prayer requests, please contact the church office so we can get those out to folks. I sent out the prayer list earlier. If you did not receive that, please reach out again to the church office, and we'll be sure to get that to you. But hey, pray for one another. Be safe out there. Stay warm. And God bless you. We'll see you Sunday.